Hello, Zero Thread Youth. Welcome to another episode of Serious Questions, Serious Answers, where we match up your questions to an expert on your topic. I'm your host, Brandon, and tonight we're doing things a little differently. I'm going to ask a question for a change. And to answer it, I've invited, again, Brian Godawa, a Christian author and Hollywood screenwriter and movie director. Mr. Godawa has written numerous scripts, including the major motion picture To End All Wars, and he did the screen adaptation of Frank Peretti's The Visitation for Ralph Winter of X-Men and Wolverine fame. Brian has written 3 books, Hollywood Worldviews, Noah Primeval, and Word Pictures. Thanks again, Brian, for coming on to speak to us.
Thanks for having me, Brandon.
All right. Well, our question for tonight is, what advice do you have for this new generation of young Christians regarding media and entertainment?
Well, that's a broad question, but I have a few things to say. First of all, I think in general we need to start seeing Hollywood not as a Sodom and Gomorrah to flee from, but as a mission field to go to. And I actually think the Christian youth are more in tune with that today than, say, in my generation, but I still think that needs to be stressed. Because people in Hollywood, yes, Hollywood puts out a lot of bad stuff and a lot of seriously detrimental stuff to our spiritual lives in many ways. But people are no more sinful in Hollywood than they are in Middle America or anywhere else in the world. And every geographical location and city has its particular sins that they have to deal with. But in my book, Hollywood Worldviews, I write about the 2 extremes that there are in reaction to culture within the Christian community. I call them either the cultural anorexics or the cultural gluttons. And the cultural anorexics are those who see the bad things in media and throw the baby out with the bathwater and say it's all bad, so stay away from it because it'll only hurt you. And of course, in so doing, I actually think that they're not only making themselves irrelevant to the culture around them, they're also missing out on a lot of good that actually that is contained within the arts and within media that is good for us as human beings, actually. And then you have the cultural gluttons, and those would be, say, the Christians who maybe trumpet their freedom in Christ, or they don't think it's a big deal, and they just expose themselves to media without questioning, without discerning. It's just sort of like, it's not serious, it's not going to hurt me, and they don't restrict anything. So you tend to have those 2 extremes, and so I wrote the book to try to help deal with those issues and come with a balanced approach to the media. Now, the first thing I want to say is, there's no such thing as just entertainment. In other words, you can't just say, oh, it's just a comedy, it's just, we're just having fun or something like that. I assure you, as an actual person working in the business, everything, television, comedy, serious or not, we are trying to influence you, the viewers, by embedding our worldviews within everything we're writing. And all entertainment carries a worldview. Now, some are more obvious than others. Say Avatar is an obvious, blatant, sort of world mythology about global Gaia, global Earth, and all this. But there might be something else, like a TV show, that might be more subtle in terms of carrying its values, like, say, The Walking Dead or something. But the point is that if you want to approach entertainment and the media as a responsible Christian, I think, first of all, we have to study worldviews to know what they are and to know how they are communicated. What I mean is, we have to put on our thinking cap. We have to use our minds a little bit here. I think all too often Christians can be either too emotional and thinking that the intellectual life is too much, God's not about that, or sometimes they just think it's too much to learn these things. But when they don't understand the nature of worldview, that is how, the lens through which we interpret our experiences, when they don't spend the time to learn that, they're more easily duped. And so, for instance, in my book, Hollywood Worldviews is a good example where it talks a little bit about worldviews and how it applies to movies, but there are many other books that you can use to educate yourself. We need to educate ourselves first. James Sire's famous book, The Universe Next Door, and another book of his called Naming the Elephant, are 2 excellent introductory books to worldview to help you use your mind more. Next, I think you have to be thoughtful of what you are consuming. For instance, we all know the phrase, you are what you eat, right? Well, it is true that if you expose yourself to a constant diet of one kind of thing, you'll tend to be influenced by that. Now, I've explained in other in other discussions that the context of the story is all important. Exposing yourself to a story that has violence in it or some kind of sin is not inherently bad. These like, say, Braveheart, or what about The Passion of the Christ? That was the most violent movie I've ever seen in all history, right? So the context determines whether or not it's appropriate. But you do have to be aware of the fact that even if it's appropriate, a constant diet of violence can possibly have a negative influence on you. So you have to be aware of these things. But more important than anything is context. If you've got a context that is depicting violence as fun, or sexuality as an alternate lifestyle that doesn't have negative consequences, these kinds of things, well, then it's going to affect you even if you're just, oh, I don't believe in that. But as you expose yourself to it, it will change you in ways you're not even consciously aware. But by knowing how it's doing that and knowing how to understand the worldview that's being communicated to you, I think you will be given a discernment that will enable you to discern the good from the bad so you're not as affected by the bad. Now, there comes a point in your exposure to something where it is too much and you have to walk away, no doubt. But we live in a fallen world. Nothing's perfect. So you always have to constantly be discerning what is good and what is bad. Even with the sermons that you go to church, you have to be discerning what is bad and what is not bad. Maybe sometimes preachers don't always say the right thing in a sermon either, right? You have to balance it all. Lastly, I just want to mention, particularly for today's youth, you are a postmodern generation. If you don't know what that means, you better start doing some reading and researching, because you have to understand the particular strengths and weaknesses of your generation. You are brought up to think a certain way. You are brought up affected by technology in a certain way that other generations aren't. So know your strengths and weaknesses of that generation that you're a part of. For example, your generation tends to read less, watches more videos. You tend to watch more videos of YouTube and watch less movies. Therefore, you tend to have a shorter attention span. Makes sense, doesn't it? But what that means is you may not be as able to rationally argue from a beginning point to an end point because it takes longer time to do so, which means you may be more able to be manipulated emotionally. Now, I'm just saying these are the tendencies. That doesn't mean there aren't strengths as well to your generation. But in terms of exposing yourself to the media, know those weaknesses and know your strengths. The strengths of video are, of course, for example, the power to communicate an idea through a story and emotional connection with human beings can have much more effect on people than some rational argument. I'm trying to defend my faith and list all these arguments why I believe the Bible. And those are good, but sometimes those don't connect with people like a good story does in touching the heart and touching the emotions, as well as embodying those beliefs in a lived-out drama. And that's the power of storytelling, which is also a strength of your generation. So knowing your strengths and weaknesses will help you to discern the good from the bad and hopefully be able to protect yourself from the bad, but move forth and use the strength of the good for your for the agenda of the kingdom.
Yeah, that's awesome, Brian. I think the idea of a worldview is such an important thing to grasp, because it'll when you go into a movie or when you read a book, you're able to pick out what the author's worldview is just by reading their work. And once you've gained that skill, you can evaluate everything you take in on an entirely different level, and you're able to critique it, and you're able to prevent things from just passing blindly into your subconscious. And as you brought up in the very beginning, we need Christian young people to be able to have that ability, and then not only have that ability to prevent them from being corrupted by culture, but to go into Hollywood or go into writing or go into the various arenas of art and change culture and redeem culture and give them a taste of what truth is and what real satisfaction is versus the fake satisfaction that is so often depicted as good, when it's just really not.
Yeah, and I would also add that I think one of the downsides, one of the negative aspects of the culture watchdogs, the guys that are always out there telling you what's wrong with everything and all this bad stuff, a lot of it's true. I'm not going to deny that, but I think a lot of it isn't, because what sometimes what happens is if you only focus on figuring out what's wrong with everything and you don't understand the truth in an opposing viewpoint, then you are just as ineffective and also, I think, spiritually deficient as those who are not thoughtful. For example, if you cannot watch a movie, say a movie like Avatar, which everyone in the world has seen, and you just look at that and say, oh, look, that's just a prejudiced propaganda piece about worshiping the earth, anti-American, a political piece, making religious Christians look bad, this kind of thing. Well, that's all true to a certain degree, making America look bad, and that may be true, but there's also a lot of good elements to that movie that I think if we can discern and agree with them. For example, there's a lot about courage, there's a lot about sacrifice. These are all values that we would agree with. And, to some degree, I think there is truth in the fact that it is wrong. While I would not necessarily say that America is an imperialistic country exploiting natural resources and killing people because we don't care about it. But nevertheless, there are sometimes in history nations or people groups or corporations may do that. They may exploit the nature or the environment, and that's not right. And so the ability to discern, well, this is what's true about it, but it's an extreme. It's taken to an extreme to worshiping Mother Earth. If you can discern those differences, you can appreciate what's good in it, but also be able to point out where you disagree. And if you see what I'm saying, I think that makes you not only a stronger believer, but I think it makes you a better human in being able to connect with people who you may not agree with, but we're still creating the image of God, and we have to find those places of connection in order to communicate our truth in love. Yeah,
that's hitting the nail on the head. Definitely, we can't just be critics. We have to praise what's good within culture, and not just criticize it.
And Jesus said, "You are in the world, not of it." He didn't say you're out of the world. And Christians who stay away from the world, they're actually not biblical. They think they're being holy, but they're actually not being biblical, because Jesus went and he partied with the sinners and the prostitutes, right? And he interacted with that environment to bring redemption. He didn't cut himself off from it. And if we want to redeem culture, we have to interact redemptively with it. And so you're right. That's I think the way to really go about it.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Brian. That was a great answer. And youth, if you want to find out more about Brian Godawa's work, go to briangodawa.com. There are a lot of free articles on faith and movies and worldview there. So I encourage you to go check that out. And remember, if you have a serious question and want a serious answer, write it down and put it in the box. See ya, youth.